Okay, so this is the second part of lecture 2. So water and life. Well, the chemistry of water is actually really important for life on Earth because life began in water and evolved there. And you yourself are approximately 75% water. And it's the chemical properties of water that make life possible. So let's have a look at the structure of water. Well, it looks really simple. You have an oxygen atom bonded to two hydrogen atoms. Now, they're bonded with covalent bonds. However, the oxygen's nucleus has a much higher mass because it's got more protons and neutrons, and so it has a stronger pull on the electrons in the molecule. So towards the oxygen side of the molecule, it's slightly negative because it's pulling more of the electrons towards it, whereas the hydrogen side is slightly positive. This is referred to as polarity, and water is considered a polar molecule. So the polarity of water results in weak electrical attractions that occur between the neighboring water molecules. These weak attractions are referred to as hydrogen bonds. And these hydrogen bonds result in most of the interesting life-supporting properties of water. One of these properties is cohesion of water. The water molecules stick together. In my face-to-face class, I often do a demonstration where I make a series of students hold hands, and I hold one of the students' hands and pull really hard. And what happens is all of the other students come tumbling with us because of that bond between the people by holding hands. The hydrogen bond is very similar. It pulls water molecules along. And this is important because trees use this cohesive property of water to be able to pull water from the roots all the way up to the leaves. Now, the hydrogen bonding between the water molecules moderates temperature as well. It means that water has a very strong resistance to temperature change because as energy is put into the water molecules, they'll start to vibrate. But in order to change temperature, you'd have to increase the amount of energy added to the system much more than you would for many other compounds. So water can absorb and store a large amount of heat while only changing a few degrees in temperature. Now, when water freezes or becomes solid, it actually has an interesting property in that the density of ice is lower than liquid, and the ice is therefore lighter, and so it will float on top of water. This is partly because the hydrogen bonds help water to form a crystalline structure that has gaps in it. If you have a look at this illustration of ice molecules, there are gaps between the water molecules and the ice, whereas with the liquid water, the water molecules can actually be a little bit closer together. This is important because if ice did not float, every time you would have a cold snap, the water would freeze and sink to the bottom, and eventually all of the oceans would fill up with ice, and there would be no liquid water and no aquatic life could survive. So it's quite convenient for us that water has this strange property of actually being lighter as a solid. I always find that odd because pretty much everything else, the general rule of chemistry is that the least dense is gas, then it's liquid, and then it's solid. But for water, least dense is gas, then you've got your solid, and then you've got your liquid as being the most dense. Now, because of the polarity in the water molecules, it allows water to be a solvent. It's a solvent for polar substances. Polar substances include salts and things that have ionic bonds. So ions, cations, and anions like sodium and chlorine can actually dissolve into water. The dissolving agent, in this case water, is referred to as the solvent, and the substance that's being dissolved, such as the salt crystal, is referred to as the solute. Now, we are carbon-based life, and so carbon chemistry is quite important for us. Carbon's got 4 electrons in an outer shell, and it can form up to 4 single covalent bonds. Now, it's a little bit like Lego blocks, in that you can add to the carbon skeleton, so they can vary in length. And not only that, but they can become branched or unbranched, and you can have single bonds or double bonds, and the locations of the bonds can vary. In addition, if you have a long enough carbon chain, it can be arranged into a ring. And some of these molecules that are based on carbon can be really long. For example, in your body, you've got about 2 meters of DNA in each and every single cell. So let's talk about the more important biological molecules. There are 4 categories. These include carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So carbohydrates, these contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and they generally are the things that fuel the reactions in cells. So this is the energy storage that most organisms have. Monosaccharides are small compounds like this. This is a small hexose sugar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is hex, and it can either be in a linear form or it can be in a ring form. You can bond monosaccharides together to join them up into long loops. A disaccharide consists of 2 monosaccharides, and the way in which that works is you remove a water molecule from the 2 monomers, and you can form your disaccharide. So 2 glucose monomers together can form maltose. Maltose is the sugar that is in beer. Poly means many. Polysaccharides consist of many repeating units of monosaccharides. There are 3 important ones. Starch, which is the storage in plants. Glycogen, which is storage in animals, in muscles and tissues. And cellulose, which is a structural component of plants. Cellulose is the fiber that you find in your vegetables that you can't digest. Lipids are also known as fats, and they consist largely of triglycerides. A triglyceride has a glycerol molecule that's been attached to 3 fatty acids, so it looks like a letter E, like this. The fatty acids can be quite variable, and between the carbons in the fatty acid you have lots of bonds, and the energy that your body can use is stored between those bonds. Fats are also used for cushioning and insulation. Proteins are chains constructed from amino acids, and they can perform most of the tasks that the body needs to function, and they're very elaborate. There's all sorts of them. On this list is not one of the ones that I would say is really important, and that is enzymes. Every chemical reaction in your body requires enzymes, and each reaction has its own specific enzyme, and each enzyme is generally based on a protein. You also have structural proteins like keratin in your hair and nails, collagen in your skin. There are storage proteins, like the kinds that you would find in beans, contractile proteins in muscles, and then transport proteins such as hemoglobin, which helps to transport oxygen in your blood. So amino acids are named amino acids because they consist of a carbon that's attached to an amino group and a carboxylic acid group. And they can have a side group. The side groups vary among the 20 different amino acids. And all the proteins in all living organisms are constructed from a common set of 20 kinds of amino acids. You may not think that that's possible, but just think about how much information is stored in your computer, and your computer is using binary code, zeros and ones. and different series of zeros and ones can produce pretty much everything that your computer does. Living organisms, their code for proteins has got 20, not just 0 and 1, but 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So there's a lot more variation that can be constructed from your amino acids. So how do amino acids bond together to perform proteins? Well, similarly to the way in which monosaccharides will bond together to form polysaccharides, you have the removal of a water molecule. This is called dehydration synthesis in both cases. The bond that forms between the two amino acids is referred to as a peptide bond, and it can be recognized by the following: a carbon bonded with a double bond to an oxygen, and a single bond to a nitrogen that's got a single bond to a hydrogen. So the arrangement of amino acids in sequence is what makes each amino acid different. And a great example of this is in the disease called sickle cell. So in a normal red blood cell, the sequence of amino acids that make the hemoglobin in the red blood cell are quite well known. If you have sickle cell disease, it's a change in a single amino acid in that sequence. Instead of glutamine, you have valine, and that completely changes the three-dimensional properties of the hemoglobin in such a way that it creates a disease. Nucleic acids are the information storage molecules. They're chains of nucleotides, and each nucleotide consists of a phosphate group attached to a sugar and a nitrogenous base. These are really important because the sequences of nucleic acids provide the directions for making proteins. We'll learn a lot more about this later in the semester. In DNA, the nucleotides have one of the following bases. You've either got thymine, cytosine, adenine, or guanine. Two strands of DNA join together to form a double helix, and the nucleotides are linked into long chains. We'll spend quite a bit of time later this semester learning more about the structure of DNA. RNA, which is a relative of DNA, is different from DNA because its sugar has got an extra oxygen, and instead of having thymine as one of the bases, it has uracil. So that's the end of Lecture 2.